This idea that the pagan gods, the pagan deities, the one thing that they all have in common, or the two things that they all have in common, are that people must serve their needs and that we must appease them so that they don't become angry when their needs are not met. That's what all pagan gods have in common. And so therefore, whether it be that we take the virgin and throw her into the volcano to somehow appease the pagan gods, or whether we take all of the things and bring them into the temple and make the sacrifices and all those things, the whole idea is that the pagan god needs to be served, and if he's not served, he gets angry, so we better do it. What does that develop in the minds of the worshiper? You're serving an angry, needy God. Is that the kind of God that you want to serve? Is there going to be any joy in that kind of service? No, none whatsoever. There can't be any joy when that God is needy. You have to supply the need, and if you don't supply the need, he's going to get angry. People, that's the pagan view of God. And I would submit to you that that is the view of a lot of believers, or professing believers. God is needy. We have to supply those needs, and he will be angry if we don't. Is that our view of God? When we come down to the issue of pagan rulers, we see the same thing. If we take a step down a notch on the authority scale, what was the whole purpose of the emperor? The masses were there to serve him and take care of him. They were slaves. He was the master. The same thing could be said of the common view of slave owners during that time. The slave was not even considered to be a person. They were less than people. They were property. They were chattel. You could take one step on down to the authority of the husband and you found the same thing. The wife was not even considered to be her own person. She was a little higher than the slave. She was treated better than the house slave would have been treated. But still, as we saw a few weeks ago, she was expected to follow the God of her husband. She was expected to only have friends that were connected with her husband. In other words, the wives of the men that he associated with. She couldn't have her own circle of friendships. That would be somehow disrespecting her husband or showing her own power or showing her own desire to kind of have her own life. And that wasn't her calling according to society at that time. And people, I guess one of the things that really bothers me is the idea that Christianity gets blamed for somehow demeaning the woman when Christianity is the one belief, the one religion that elevates her, and as Peter says in this very passage, she is a fellow heir of the grace of life. And that husbands are to honor their wives, and we're going to look at that whole issue next week. And that the husband is to live with her in an understanding way. He is to devote his life, everything about him, to know his wife as intimately as he possibly can. Show me another religion on the face of the earth that elevates women to that level. You can't. And yet, what does the world do? It looks at Christianity and say, you're the one trying to keep women down. No, we're the ones that recognize the calling, the difference in calling between the husband and the wife, but we're also the ones that elevate the wife and say she is a fellow heir of the grace of life. And if I don't act properly toward her, my prayers are hindered as a husband. We're going to look at that in a week or so too. So you see, for us to get an understanding of our calling as husbands, we really need to understand this issue of authority, don't we? If we don't understand it properly, we're not going to be able to be the leaders and the husbands that we've been called to be. So one of the first principles I want us to learn today, does that one scare you? Does that cause a few gasps? Our God doesn't need our service. I love it. I love John Piper for his development of this thought. The understanding that God doesn't need us. He's not needy. He provides for us, but He's not needy. And all of us kind of know this phrase now. God is most glorified in us when what? When we are most satisfied in Him. What does that whole issue of satisfaction mean? It looks back at the provision of God. We're satisfied. We're at rest. We're at peace with our God because He has provided all things. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him. I was talking with Randy about this the other day. I want you to notice how the book of Acts, when Paul is at Mars Hill, we looked at this a couple of weeks ago when Jim was here. But let's go back and look at this passage one more time. In Acts chapter 17, beginning in verse 22, so Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. What therefore you worship is unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is He served by human hands as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Now let's just stop there for a minute. What does that God need? Nothing. He did not even need this world. He did not need this creation. His whole purpose of creating the world and everything in it was so that the creation could enjoy Him. Not so that the creation could give anything to Him. God is not changed by the creating of the world. It is then the outshining of His glory in what He's done. And His creatures then have the wonderful blessing of knowing this God, of enjoying who He is, of worshiping Him for who He is. But God doesn't need us. It wasn't as if in eternity past He's looking at the Son and the Spirit and they're all sitting there saying, and He's saying, there's just something missing. And if I could just have that, boy, I'd be complete then. That's a pagan view of God. No, God said, I'm going to create so that the universe can express my glory and so that my creation can enjoy me. That's the purpose. That's the reason. And people, at the moment that we shift any at all and begin to go into the idea and the notion that our God is needy, we begin to move toward a pagan God, a pagan understanding of deity. Paul goes on to say in this passage, picking up then in verse 25, and we made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having to turn allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God in the hope that they may feel their way toward Him and find Him. Yet He is actually not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed His offspring. This God is so powerful, in such control, that He has actually set the boundaries and the times and the places for every civilization that has ever arisen